Hi guys, welcome back to another video, or welcome if it's your first time here. My name is Dan, and in today's video I'd like to create some kind of comprehensive guide of how to monitor your Kemper. But knowing me, I'll miss some stuff out and go on a few tangents, so this is just one man's perspective on a guide to monitoring your Kemper. I've actually been a bit organised today and written a script, so if my eyes go walkies, that is why. There will be no playing in this video because there's no way of demonstrating any of these concepts. You've just kind of got to be in the room with it. I do have a guitar because apparently I can't be comfortable on camera without one. So without further ado, let's get into it. So if you're using a device that models or profiles guitar amps, there's a lot of options out there to amplify it, to monitor it. And it can be quite confusing if you're new to it, and to be honest, it can be quite confusing if you're not. There's a lot of jargon and things floating around, so I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible. To amplify your Kemper or other modelling device, I feel like you can break it down into two main groups. Group number one is the full range flat response, which FRFR is the abbreviation, or a traditional guitar cabinet. And if you look at it like a diagram, there is some crossover in the middle, but we'll get into that slightly later on. So as the name implies, a full range flat response speaker aims to give you as neutral a sound as possible across the audio spectrum. It's supposed to basically reproduce exactly what you put in. And this covers things like PA speakers, studio monitors, hi-fi speakers, even in-ear monitors and headphones are a form of full range flat response monitoring. Although these are all designed and marketed to be as flat and neutral as possible, a lot of companies do add a little bit of sonic tweaking to make them sound more pleasing, or to give it that signature sound that the company's known for. Even if there's no deliberate tweaking of the sound, the cabinet's size, construction, driver size all contribute to the sound. So even though they're flat and neutral, they're not all created equal. A guitar speaker or speaker cab, on the other hand, has a very guitar-friendly response with cuts or boosts all over the frequency spectrum. This is what gives the guitar its sound. If you've ever heard an amp DI'd straight into the board, it's an absolute fizzy mess. So the guitar speaker, in my opinion, is as responsible as the amp for the final guitar sound. So why would you use one over the other? Well, the Kemper's main goal is to reproduce a guitar sound that was profiled. This includes the amp, the cab, the microphone, and when they were making the profile, they would have been listening to it on studio monitors. So using a full range flat response monitoring solution will probably get you as close to what they were listening to when they profiled as possible with the whole signal chain. If you use a guitar cab with the Kemper and it's set up correctly, it can sound fantastic. But the thing to remember is that that speaker's sonic signature will be on every profile that you listen to, which could be a bad thing, could be a good thing, depending on your preferences. It's surprising how similar different amp profiles or amps in general will sound if you use exactly the same guitar cab. If you use a full range flat response cabinet, you'll have a much wider sonic palette and you'll be hearing the actual speakers that were profiled when the amp was captured. So you'll have a much wider spectrum of sounds. Moreover, full range flat response cabs are often smaller, lighter, more powerful, at least on paper anyway, than most guitar cabs. Full range flat response cabs are also very readily available in both active and passive formats. So if you have an unpowered Kemper or Kemper Stage, you can easily get a powered full range flat response cabinet to use, and you won't need any additional gear. If you opt to use a full range flat response cab on stage, you have the advantage that you are basically listening to exactly what the audience is. If you're on stage with a guitar amp and it's mic'd up, depending on where that mic is and what the sound man or your bandmates have decided to do to that sound, it can sound wildly different to what you imagine your guitar will sound like. If you have a full range flat response cab on stage, you are basically listening to the front of house feed. So I think that gives you an advantage for actually dialing things in accurately, and you know that what's going out front is what you want to hear. As I said earlier, with these FRFR cabs, there is definitely a difference between brands and also speaker sizes, wattages, etc, etc. It's perhaps not as different as it would be putting two guitar speakers next to each other, but I definitely urge you to check out a variety before deciding that FRFR is for you or not. Sounds great, so why would you use a guitar cab? Well, this is a bit of a complicated one. In your playing career, whether it's on stage, at home, in rehearsal rooms or in studios, you are probably very used to the feeling and sound of having a guitar amp behind you. And if you're using the Kemper with an FRFR cabinet, you're not really hearing an amp behind you. You're hearing an amp that's been mic'd up, so you're hearing the sound of the mics, the sound of the pre's, and then it being captured. So although it doesn't sound like it would be that different, if you've ever gone out and listened to your guitar in sound check through the PA, it's quite a different experience to standing in front of a guitar amp and actually pushing air. Now, this is certainly not a bad thing, but it definitely takes a bit of getting used to. Using a guitar cab with the cab portion of the modelling amp or the profiler turned off will bring back that sort of amp in the room feel that a lot of people say that they miss when they go to a full range flat response system. I feel that cabinet construction is probably quite a big factor in this, being that a lot of guitar cabs are big wooden boxes with speakers in, and a lot of full range flat response speakers are much smaller enclosures with ABS shells normally to keep it lightweight. It's just a very different experience. Another complaint I have seen online, reading various forums, being the nerd that I am, is that a lot of guitarists, when they first move into modelling and full range flat response, is that they're just not used to having that amount of the frequency spectrum available to them. If you're not used to dialing that in, things can very quickly become too boomy or too ice picky and bright, and it's definitely a learning curve. Whereas with a guitar cabinet, these things have been taken care of for you the same as they are with any amp. You know, when you've got your normal bass, mid and treble controls, it's the speaker doing most of the sculpt in there. So if you opt to use a normal guitar cab, you'll be in very familiar territory. So is there a best of both worlds answer? Possibly. So earlier I talked about the two main groups being FRFR and standard guitar cabs. There's a fair few options that cross over in the middle there. There's companies like Friedman, Matrix and Laney, who have all produced full range cabs, but they're designed much more like a traditional guitar cab in construction and aesthetically, and it aims to give you that sort of feel of an amp, but with the flat response to change the speaker sound along with your amp. In more recent years, Celestion have released their X200 speaker, which is designed to be a direct drop-in to guitar cabinets that you already own, and they are designed to have a full range live response, which is probably some buzzword action there, but what it aims to do is give you more of the feeling of having a guitar amp behind you, but again letting you imprint the speakers into it that the profiles were captured with. Moving on from that, Kemper have obviously now released their Kemper Cone and Kemper Cabinet with a K, and that aims to go one step further. It's a full range speaker, but again aims a lot more to capture the sound and feeling of a real cabinet. Because it's Kemper's proprietary product, there's a menu within the Kemper that lets you put these, what they're calling speaker imprints, sort of into the cab. And there's more control there, and it's something I would love to check out, but unfortunately haven't had the time or money. So same with the X200 actually. So if there's anyone out there from Kemper or Celestion that would like to send me any of these to review/keep, that would be awesome. So even though there is a little bit of crossover in the middle, I think really there is two main groups of monitoring, which is full range flat response and a traditional cab. So how do you go about setting up your Kemper for either of these? So to use your Kemper with a powered FRFR cab, Simply hook it into either the main or monitor outputs, and you don't need to make any changes to the settings. If you want to use the Kemper with a standard guitar cabinet, the first step is to disengage the cabinet block globally for both the monitor output and the power amp output if you're using the powered Kemper. You can just disengage the cabinet block on the front panel, but this will disengage the cabinet for all outputs, and I'd imagine in most situations you'd want to keep the main outputs with the cabinet engaged. To do this, go to the output menu by pressing the output button on the front panel. In this menu, you will find a button labelled Monitor Cab Off. Simply select this to disengage the cab block globally for both the monitor output and the speaker output if you're using the powered Kemper. If you have an unpowered Kemper or the Stage and you want to use a guitar cabinet, you're going to need some form of external power amp. If you want to use a dedicated power amp, simply hook up the monitor output of your Kemper to the power amp input, and in turn the power amp output into your cabinet. If you've got the unpowered unit or the Stage and you don't have a dedicated power amp, it's very easy to utilize the power section of most guitar amps. All you have to do for that is run the monitor output into the effects return of either your amp head or guitar combo, and then you can utilize the power amp straight into either a guitar cab if you've got your head, or into the internal speaker if you've got a combo. This will bypass all of the preamp control, so like gain, EQ, etc., and give you a direct tap into just the clean power section of the amp. The presence control and resonance control will still be active if your amp has them, but be aware that not always the master volume is active. So word of warning, if you're going to try this, make sure your Kemper's volume is all the way down to start with, because if you tap into the return and your master volume isn't active, you've got the full whatever the wattage of your amp is at your disposal. So it will save you blowing yourself across the room by accident. Not with power, with sound. If you wanted to run stereo monitor cabs and you want to leave your main outputs alone, you can do this by changing some menu features. So if you go to the output source menu and select the monitor stereo output button, this will then utilize the direct output of this as the second half of your stereo output. And then you just run both of those, so the monitor out and the direct out, into your left and right of your power amp, and then out to two cabs. And that will give you your full stereo image. It's worth noting that the built-in amp in the Kemper is designed to be as flat and neutral as possible, again to reproduce the sounds that were profiled to start with. If you're using other forms of power amp like valve power amps or effects returns on your amp, bear in mind that it'll add some colour to the signal path. And for me personally, I think that's quite a good thing. I like, and I have done, run my Kemper with a valve power section. But it's just worth bearing in mind that this will be another coloration to the sound if you're after hearing exactly what was profiled in the first place. The Kemper power amp or some others on the market that are designed to be as flat as possible will be your best bet. Whatever the option or options you decide to go with for monitoring your Kemper, don't overlook the global EQs that are available to you. So go press the output button, scroll along, and you have both a monitor output EQ and a main output EQ. This lets you individually tailor the frequencies coming out of both the monitor output, so that's the monitor out or the power amp output, and the main outputs, which will be going to your front of house or your recording interface. This is super useful on a room-to-room basis if you're using a cabinet, and it just lets you set less of a difference between the monitor output and the main output if you're using two types of speaker. So to conclude this little section, it's important to experiment, and feel free to experiment. There's not a lot of harm that can come from it, but just remember, if you're using a traditional guitar cab, make sure you press the monitor cab off button, and if you're using full range flat response, make sure that is disengaged. You will know pretty quickly if there's a problem, because if you're using a guitar cab and it sounds like there's a blanket over it, you probably haven't pressed that button. And if you're using full range flat response and it sounds like a swarm of angry bees, that probably needs to change. So which of these solutions is best for me? Well, unfortunately, that is an unanswerable question. It depends completely on your requirements, like how much wattage you want. Do you want it to be full range flat response? Do you prefer the sound of a guitar cab? And at the end of the day, it's all personal preference. Sonic beauty is in the ear of the beholder, if you like. Like I've said before in videos, if it sounds good to you and it works, then it's the right thing, even if there is things written or said to the contrary. Just look for what works best for you. If it's any help at all, I'm going to quickly go into the way that I use the Kemper. So live, I use a traditional guitar cabinet. And I do that because I'm just too used to the way it sounds and feels on stage. It's just that relationship between guitar and speaker. That's the way I like it. For most big gigs, I also use in-ear monitors. So I have my cabinet on stage and I also have in-ears. My in-ears have the normal left and right feed with the cab modeling and everything. So for me, that's sort of best of both worlds in that situation, because you get the consistency of the Kemper, but I get like a real cab on stage feeling, but I also get the fidelity of that in my in-ears. So I think that's a great combination for live, and might be one that you want to look into. It's only a little 112 cab, but it's that feeling of the air moving. When the Kemper's at home, I use it run directly out the main left and right into my rather meager recording setup and monitor back through my studio monitors. I do this because the kind of volumes that I play at home, it doesn't warrant having a cab. The cabinet with the bigger speaker, the wood enclosure and everything, it just creates too much bass and moves too much air really to be using at home. And most of the time, I think you get a better representation of the Kemper at home through smaller speakers. It's not trying to move as much air, and I just think it's got more fidelity. But like I said, even with studio monitors, not all of them are created equal. I know it's frustrating, but make sure you shop around. Not all studio monitors are going to sound the same. I've found some that I really like, but I'm used to the way they sound. So I know that if something's not sounding particularly right in a frequency, I know it's not the speakers because I know them. It takes a little while to get used to that feeling of not having a cab. So I think that concludes the video for today. I hope I've covered everything I meant to. There'll probably be some annotations throughout of things I've forgotten. If there's any further questions or suggestions for future videos, please leave it down in the comments below. Or if you dig this video, leave a comment. You know, it helps me push on knowing that people out there are enjoying it. And don't forget to subscribe for more content of like the Kemper stuff, but also doing some pedal demos, been releasing a little bit of music. So yeah, just the channel's a cool place to hang out and chat to fellow nerds. And that's what I want it to be. So all the best, guys. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you again in the next video. Cheers.